Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're joining us right now, it's probably because you are a lifelong learner.
Absolutely.
You're someone who is always hunting for those brilliant, paradigm-shifting aha moments, but you want to get there without drowning in just a massive sea of information overload.
Right, which is so easy to do.
Exactly. Well, you are in the exact right place. Today, we are opening up an excerpted text simply titled 006, Every Believer is a Witness.
It's a great piece.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack a highly disruptive idea that challenges centuries, and I mean literally centuries, of basic religious assumptions.
Yeah, it completely flips the script.
Think about this for a second. What if the greatest untapped force for mission in the world isn't more polished programs or better marketing strategies or hiring more professional clergy? What if the greatest force is actually ordinary people who just don't realize they have already been called to the front lines?
That is exactly the premise we're exploring today. And it is a fascinating one. In this deep dive, we're going to look at not just the what of this concept, but the why.
Right.
We're going to examine the massive historical shifts that changed how we view everyday work. We'll look at the specific ancient text the author draws from, and we will break down some incredibly practical tools provided by the source material.
Because it's not just theory here.
Exactly. The ultimate goal here is to analyze the author's argument that everyday life, your everyday life right now, is actually the primary theater of mission.
I really love that phrase, the primary theater of mission, because the author starts by highlighting a problem that we rarely ever name out loud.
We really don't.
The text calls it a quiet assumption that generations of people have just unconsciously absorbed. The assumption is basically that real ministry or real impact happens up on platforms.
Right, the stage and microphone model.
Yeah. It happens in pulpits, with microphones, and is done by professionals who have these fancy theological titles. Meanwhile, the rest of us, the ordinary folks with desk jobs and mortgages.
We're just the audience.
Exactly.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
are just supposed to support the work, attend the services, put some money in the offering plate, and maybe invite a friend to a building if we are feeling exceptionally brave.
It's a completely outsourced mission.
We pay the professionals to do the heavy lifting.
It is an incredibly pervasive mindset. And what's fascinating here is how the author traces this back historically to show how it actually happened.
Because it wasn't always like this.
No, not at all. The text points out that this shift wasn't born out of some malicious secret intent to sideline everyday people. In the very early days of the Christian church, the mission was completely decentralized.
Organic.
Exactly, a grassroots, organic movement. But as the church grew exponentially, especially after the conversion of the Roman Emperor Constantine in the 4th century,
That was the big turning point.
huge turning point. Christianity went from being a persecuted underground movement to a legally recognized massive institution. To maintain order, preserve doctrine, and just manage these rapidly growing communities across the empire, structures had to be formalized.
Right.
Suddenly, bishops, presbyters, and deacons took on very rigidly defined roles.
Oh, wait, let me push back on that for a second, though.
Sure.
If you have a movement growing that fast across the entire Roman Empire, wasn't that kind of structure absolutely necessary? I mean, without formal leadership and centralized hubs, wouldn't the whole movement have just splintered into 1,000 different weird cults?
Or that is a completely fair point, and it's exactly why it happened. It had a practical necessity for survival and scale. But the author's point is that this well-intentioned centralization had a massive, hidden, long-term cost.
But unintended consequences.
Precisely. Over the centuries, it fundamentally altered the psychology of the people in the pews. It turned ordinary believers from active participants in a vital mission into passive consumers of religious goods.
Wow, passive consumers.
The laity essentially became an audience watching a performance. Ministry became a specialized vocation for the few rather than a shared, everyday calling for the many.
It makes me think of when a scrappy startup gets too big.
Oh, yeah.
In the early days, everybody does everything and the energy is just electric. But then the company scales, layers of management are added, and suddenly you have a department of culture and fun instead of people just actually having fun and building things together at work. It gets compartmentalized.
That is a brilliant analogy.
Yeah.
And the theological cost of that compartmentalization is exactly what the author is highlighting. When mission is professionalized, like a corporate department, the majority of people end up living divided lives.
Oh, true.
You practice your faith privately. Maybe you attend a service on the weekend to get your spiritual cup filled, but then Monday rolls around. You navigate your career, your university classes, your neighborhood relationships without any kind of missional lens at all.
mission basically became a specialized department of the church instead of the actual foundational identity of the people.
Exactly. And the source sums this up with a really provocative statement. It argues that the church doesn't have a mission.
Or rather, the mission has a church.
Yes.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if the author is right, the solution requires a total overhaul of how people see themselves. And that brings us to a major theological pivot in the text.
And the identity piece.
Right. The author relies heavily on the ancient biblical text of 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. In this passage, the writer is addressing ordinary, scattered, marginalized people and calls them a chosen people and a royal priesthood.
Which is a heavy title.
It really is. Now, as someone reading this today, the term royal priesthood sounds incredibly exclusive. It sounds like guys in fancy, ornate robes swinging incense. How does the author reconcile a term like that with the idea of ordinary, everyday people doing the work?
That is the crux of the paradigm shift. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to translate what priesthood actually meant in that ancient biblical context. The text uses a heavy theological term, but the author breaks it down beautifully. Priesthood is not about having an elite social status, and it is certainly not about the robes.
Dear goodness.
Right. It is fundamentally about access and representation. In the ancient world, a priest was someone who stood directly at the intersection of the divine and the mundane.
The go-between.
Exactly. They represented God's character to the people, and they carried the people's heavy, broken reality before God. By taking that specific title and applying it to an entire community of ordinary workers, servants, and citizens, the author of 1 Peter was completely dismantling the dividing wall between the sacred and the secular.
So it completely democratizes the concept.
Exactly. It removes the boundary between clergy and laity.
And the author makes a really compelling psychological argument here regarding how we step into that role. The text points out a consistent pattern. God names before he commands.
Identity always comes before activity.
Yes, you don't bear witness to earn the title of a witness. You bear witness because it is the natural, inevitable overflow of who you already are.
It's a given.
The text makes it very clear that believers are not commanded to become priests. They are told they are priests. I imagine that if a person actually internalizes that, the pressure completely comes off.
Oh, entirely.
You aren't auditioning for a role or trying to prove your worth. You are just stepping into an identity you already possess.
And when you step into that inherent identity, the way you view the random, frustrating disruptions in your life completely changes. The author illustrates this paradigm shift with a startling historical account from the book of Acts, chapter 8.
Yes, this historical anecdote blew my mind. So the source sets the scene. The early church in Jerusalem is hit with this severe, terrifying wave of persecution. Believers are violently uprooted from their homes, losing their livelihoods, and they are scattered across the surrounding regions.
A total crisis.
Absolute crisis. And the text notes a crucial detail. Who stays behind in Jerusalem? The apostles, the leaders, the professionals.
Clergy, basically.
Right. But these ordinary, terrified people who were forced to flee for their lives, what did they do when they landed in these unfamiliar new cities? The text notes that those who were scattered went everywhere preaching the word.
Just everyday people.
No pulpits. They had no polished, multi-step programs. They didn't wait around for an official letter of permission from the apostles back in Jerusalem. They just went into their new, ordinary, highly disrupted lives and shared what they had experienced.
What's fascinating here is how this challenges our modern assumptions about influence. We often rely heavily on an attractional model.
Build it and they will come.
Exactly, spending millions building big programs, massive buildings, and staging huge events to draw people into a centralized space. But what the author highlights in Acts 8 is the power of multiplication through dispersion.
Oh, that's good.
It is very similar to the modern shift we are seeing from traditional centralized media broadcasting to the decentralized creator economy.
That makes so much sense.
Right. Centralizing power and content actually narrows your overall influence, but decentralizing it, putting the tools into the hands of thousands of individuals, expands it exponentially.
So the disruption the early church faced did not pause their mission. It became the catalyst that multiplied it.
Precisely. God's mission, the text argues, is most potent when it simply cannot be contained inside a religious building. It thrives when everyday disciples carry it along ancient trade routes, into noisy marketplaces, and into informal, over-the-fence conversations.
Okay, so if the whole stage and microphone model is flawed, how on earth is a normal person supposed to pull this off today?
That's the million-dollar question.
Let's talk about the practical reality.
Mm.
How does an accountant or a mechanic or a nurse actually do this without being totally awkward and weird at their workplace?
Nobody wants to be the weird guy at work.
Nobody. The text completely dismantles what it calls the normal Christian myth, this comfortable idea that a normal Christian just focuses on personal, private spiritual growth, while a select few handle the actual mission. The author argues that your work isn't a distraction from the mission, it is the mission field. You are not just a believer who happens to have a job. You are a witness who has a vocation.
That reframing of vocation is crucial to the entire premise, and it relies on a concept the text refers to as embodied allegiance.
Embodied allegiance.
Yes. The author points out that true biblical witness is rarely loud, theatrical, or argumentative. It is incarnational. Now, that is another heavy theological word, but it really just means wrapping flesh and bone around an idea.
Show, don't tell.
It is the ultimate expression of show, don't tell. It means making God's reign visible through your everyday mundane actions. It is a school teacher demonstrating profound fairness in a broken educational system. It is a small business owner practicing absolute integrity when cutting corners would be much more profitable. It is a corporate worker refusing to participate in casual corruption. This quiet, lived faithfulness creates what the author beautifully calls holy plausibility.
Holy plausibility, I like that.
It means your actions make the message believable to the skeptical people who are quietly observing your life.
To bring that exact concept to life, the source shares some incredibly specific, grounded anecdotes. There's the story of an urban hospital nurse.
I love this one.
Now, picture a high-stress, understaffed hospital ward. Beeping machines, exhausted doctors, anxious families. This nurse never once preached a sermon in the break room. She never left religious tracts on the patient's bedside tables.
She just did her job.
She just did her job, but she treated every single patient as an image bearer, which, to translate the author's meaning, basically means treating every human being with profound, inherent dignity, regardless of how they treat you.
Even the difficult ones.
Especially the difficult ones. She stayed calm under intense pressure, and she absolutely refused to participate in the toxic workplace gossip that usually dominates those environments.
Which stands out immediately.
It really does. Over time, her burnt-out, exhausted coworkers noticed something as fundamentally different about her. They started pulling her aside, asking her how she managed to maintain her hope and her peace in such a dark place. Her consistent presence paved the way for her words.
That is a perfect example of holy plausibility. The text also shares a similar story about an accountant in a corporate firm.
Right.
Again, there was no stage, no microphone, no debate tactics. This accountant simply listened deeply to her colleagues. She showed consistent, quiet generosity and endless patience in a cutthroat corporate environment.
Which is so rare.
Incredibly rare. Eventually, over a long period of time, this steady, faithful presence led a coworker to deep spiritual transformation. The accountant didn't try to win an argument. She just lived her faith coherently in a highly secular space.
There is also a fascinating larger-scale case study in the text about a declining urban church. They were facing what so many organizations face today. They were running out of budget, their community programs were failing, and people were leaving in droves.
A classic downward spiral.
Yes. But instead of panicking and trying to invent a flashy new attraction to get people back in the doors, the leadership completely flipped the script. They stopped, looked at their congregation, and asked one simple question. Where has God already placed you?
That changes everything.
They decentralized their entire leadership model. They told the teachers, the shop owners, the baristas, and the nurses that their existing workplaces were their primary mission fields.
Yeah.
By empowering ordinary, everyday obedience over institutional machinery, the text notes that the church saw exponential relational growth across the entire city.
Those real-world stories are powerful because they demystify what it actually means to be a witness. It brings it down from the clouds. But of course, the text is also very realistic. It acknowledges the very real reality of human hesitation.
Oh, sure.
Because reading about it is one thing, but actually doing it is another. What actually stops people from living this way? The source points to several deep-seated internal barriers.
Right. It names the friction directly. So many people listen to an idea like this and immediately freeze up because they are paralyzed by the fear of social rejection.
Absolutely.
Or they suffer from this myth that to be a witness, you have to be a walking theological encyclopedia with answers to every complex philosophical question. Or, maybe the most common one, they think you have to be a highly charismatic extrovert who loves talking to strangers to share your faith.
And to overcome those specific internal barriers, the author reframes evangelism entirely. The text moves the concept completely away from coercion and pressure and moves it toward invitation and presence.
Invitation and presence.
You aren't trying to win an intellectual debate. You aren't trying to make a high-pressure sales pitch. You are simply testifying to a reality you have personally experienced.
That takes the pressure off.
Exactly. Furthermore, the text stresses that this entire endeavor relies on the Holy Spirit's empowerment rather than your own human eloquence or charisma. You don't need to be an extrovert. You don't need a degree in theology. You just need to realize that your life is already speaking volumes to the people around you. Your everyday, consistent presence is the invitation.
So let's get incredibly practical. How do you, the person listening to this right now, actually start doing this today without feeling overwhelmed?
The author actually gives a framework for this.
Yes. The text provides a fantastic, actionable tool called the My Mission Field Mapping Worksheet. It is designed to take all this high-level theology and turn it into concrete, everyday steps. Let's visualize this together. Grab a mental napkin.
Okay.
Step 1 is mapping your relational circles. You literally draw 3 circles on a page. One for your family, one for your work or school, and one for your community, like your gym, your neighborhood, or your local coffee shop. The author is basically telling us to stop looking at these environments as just places I have to be and start looking at them as specific people.
Right, you write their names down.
You have to move from the abstract to the concrete. They are people, not projects.
That is a vital distinction. Once you have named the specific individuals in your daily circles, step 2 is an influence assessment. You look at those relationships and thoughtfully determine the level of influence you currently have with them. High, moderate, or low.
Okay, but let's be clear.
It's not about ego.
Right.
The text makes a very important clarification here. Ranking your influence isn't some weird exercise to boost your ego. It is entirely about strategic love and prayerful stewardship.
How so?
Well, high influence means people who already trust you deeply and regularly seek your counsel. Moderate influence might be colleagues you collaborate with on projects every week but don't know personally. Low influence might be the barista you see for 30 seconds every morning or a peripheral acquaintance.
That makes sense.
Understanding these dynamics helps you tailor your approach so you aren't awkwardly forcing deep conversations where a foundation of trust hasn't even been built yet.
Exactly. You have to read the room. Which leads naturally into step 3, prayer mapping. You take that grid of relationships you just drew, and you start deliberately praying for those specific people by name.
Just bringing them to mind regularly.
And then finally, step 4 is committing to presence. This is where the rubber meets the road. You focus entirely on availability, integrity, and love rather than stressing out and forcing immediate results.
It's a long game.
The long game. You write down one concrete, highly achievable act of witness for the coming week for someone on your map. It could be as simple as deciding to actively listen to a stressed-out coworker for 10 minutes without offering a single piece of advice.
Just listening.
Just listening. Or choosing to greet your grumpy neighbor consistently every single morning. The text emphasizes that these small, seemingly insignificant, repeated acts of obedience compound massively over time. You are slowly building relational credibility.
And that relational credibility is the invisible scaffolding of every meaningful human interaction. True influence always moves at the speed of trust.
Yeah.
You cannot rush it. The profound conclusion the author draws is that when we stop delegating our witness to professionals and we stop relying on centralized programs to do the heavy lifting, the world stops seeing a fragmented gospel.
They stop seeing a faith that is preached loudly on a weekend but is entirely absent from the cutthroat reality of a Tuesday afternoon.
Instead, they start seeing a lived reality. They see a coherent, robust faith that actually stands up to the intense pressures and the deep mundanity of ordinary life.
So, to summarize the absolute core takeaway from this deep dive into the text, you are not a believer who just happens to have a job to pay the bills. You are a witness who has been given a vocation.
Beautifully said.
You do not need a platform, you do not need a fancy title, and you certainly do not need anyone's official permission to make an impact. Your everyday life. Your boring spreadsheets, your chaotic school drop-off routine, your brief neighborhood chats, your stressful coffee breaks, that is all sacred ground.
It really is.
The author is arguing that God has already positioned you exactly where you need to be to change the culture around you.
It really is a powerful call to awaken to your own potential. The mission of the church was never meant to belong to an elite few. It was entrusted to all. When you finally grasp that your identity precedes your activity and that your simple, faithful presence is your loudest proclamation, the most ordinary aspects of your life suddenly become deeply extraordinary.
We've covered a lot of ground today, but I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on long after this deep dive ends. It's something we haven't touched on yet, but it builds directly on everything we just discussed.
Let's hear it.
If the early church changed the world precisely because they were stripped of centralized power and scattered into the secular world, what might happen if you viewed the current disruptions, frustrations, or deeply mundane routines of your own life not as distractions from your purpose, but as the exact divine appointments you were made for? Think about that as you go about your day. Thanks for joining us, and keep learning.